So thank you so much for joining us today on Ask the Expert. It's going to be a very essential and informative session because, the mental health system in Australia is a bit hard to navigate. Even for me, I've been here 10 years and sometimes I still get confused about what's available, the differences between a counsellor and a psychologist, for example, and all the different rules that there is. So, we've got a few questions about that coming up. So for anyone who's watching live, because on this app I can't see who's here unless you comment. So if you're watching live, you can say hi, or anyone watching the replay, if you've got any questions, just comment or let either of us know and we'll be happy to help you. First of all, so Anushka, you are the founder of Umeed Psychology. So can you tell us a bit about what you do at Umeed? Because I know there's so many incredible things, and I get a bit like, oh, you're doing this now. Oh, you're doing this now. So if you want to say
it really comes through.
I relate to that,
So in a nutshell, we're a multicultural mental health well-being service. So essentially we provide all your psychological sort of care. So we do individual therapy, group therapy, we provide assessments as well, so psychoeducational assessments for things like ASD, ADHD, learning difficulties. We do consulting work as well with different organizations and collab with a lot of different people as well. And then some of the fun things that we do is that we run a safe spaces program for the multicultural communities, and that includes things like the South Asian Women's Group or the Multicultural Women's Domestic Violence Group or the LGBTQIA group. Basically, they're free spaces just for people to get together and connect with each other. And then as part of that, we sometimes run like fun events as well. Yeah. And then we've got the mental health literacy project, which is called Cultured Up. And as part of that, we also run fun events. So things like Dance for Dopamine, things that support people to have, to get engaged in like sort of mental health in a more holistic sense and like get that sort of psychoeducation out there too. And we run a mentorship program. And we have a international student program where we provide free counselling to international students.
Ask you about soon.
Yes, I think that's it.
There's so much incredible work. So much incredible work that you and your team do. And it's a lot. There is definitely a lot. And I'm so in awe of you. Like, it's just, there's a lot to do. I know from my own small business, like there is a lot to do. So serious, Thank you. Thank you for giving all this to the community. And I genuinely mean that. Like, I really do mean that. So let's, I'm going to ask you about some of your projects later, especially the international student one.
Yeah.
I want to just get back to basics about the mental health system in Australia, because for me, in the work that I do, where I support migrants and international students with their career and communication skills, I learned really quickly that there's a lot to do with confidence and mental health. And obviously I cannot support them with that. But even for me, sometimes I don't know where to direct them, particularly when money is such a problem. So I would like to start looking at ASD and ADHD. So I've just been diagnosed myself, and I know how insanely expensive and difficult
100%
is. I had a woman I was working with who was diagnosed maybe a year ago, but she didn't believe it because she didn't trust the psychiatrist. So she went for an entire year not believing it and really, really struggling until I told her my experience, and she's getting the support now. But for anyone out there who might think they do have ADHD, because there's a lot about it in the mainstream media right now, where do they start? What do they do?
Oh man, okay, so this is an interesting one, because I also went through the process, right? So and before you were talking about how hard it is to navigate the mental health care system as just like your average person in Australia. Man, as a mental health professional, Like I know, and a lot of early career psychs will also vouch for this. When I first started up, I found it difficult to navigate, and I'm a mental health practitioner. So you're not alone if you're out there. Even now, like, sometimes my admin team and I will get together and we're like, what do these codes mean? What is Medicare actually offering to us? What are we allowed to give? But in terms of assessments, yes, it can be a little bit difficult. So if you are thinking that you've got ADHD or ASD or some kind of learning disability, or something neurodevelopmentally going on for you, my recommendation would first be to talk to a therapist, probably. Reach out and just be like, hey, I think I've got something going on for you. And most times we'll say come in for an assessment, and in like that first sort of session that we do, generally speaking, at least this is the way that I do it, and look, a lot of my colleagues do it as well, so we'll do that sort of 50-minute intake assessment. So we'll have a chat to you. We're going to get to know your background information. We'll walk you through the process of what the assessment will look like specifically for you, because for some people it differs. For some people we might need to do a cognitive assessment. For some people we don't need to do it. But then we talk you through the psychoeducational side of it as well. And I think specifically with ADHD as well, what I find is people will come in and they'll be like, I don't know if my problem is a big enough problem for me to even be coming to get an assessment done. And, I've got clients who I see for counseling purposes as well. And when they come in, and I actually had someone recently who was like, Anushka, I think I have ADHD. And I'm like, cool. I'm like, well, before we go through that really long assessment process, do you want to go learn more about it? And so I'll give them resources. So things like, and look, I'm talking from personal experience as well. I definitely learned about the disorder a little bit more before I headed into doing assessment. But resources that would be fantastic, I think, is like ADHD 2.0 is a fantastic book, or actually that's just a really good start from there, or Scattered Minds by Gabor Mate. That's also a really great one. That'll give you a very holistic understanding of, are these things that I'm aligning with, and do I need to maybe take a step further to learn about this and pursue an assessment, because I think it's difficult to go down this what seems like a very long process without really understanding what something is first. Yeah,
absolutely. And and you do offer the assessments if people do get to that stage, but I definitely agree with education first. We can if anyone is thinking about this, we can suggest some resources. I laughed when you mentioned those books, because I have the books, but my ADHD says I can't read them yet.
Audible at 2.0 speed all the way.
Read the same sentence 5 times. Anyway, also it is worth noting, because I think a lot of people have this issue, is that a psychiatrist is also someone who you would go to for the official diagnosis and medication if you need it.
If needed.
That's important. So could you, leading on to that, could you tell us the difference between a psychiatrist, a counselor, and a psychologist?
Okay.
And if I've missed anyone else as well.
Just trying to think who else does stuff in the realm of mental health. I mean, social workers do a lot of work as well. So you can also see a social worker for counseling purposes. Yeah. So your counselors, and I think usually also social workers as well, will go through sort of similar training around counseling purposes. Counseling is essentially talk therapy. So, you go into the session, you have conversations with your person. They will use a lot of the similar sort of techniques that psychologists do as well. It might not necessarily be as concrete, and everyone has their own sort of style. I mean, that's the same with any therapist. I think the main difference in terms of also just going to see a particular professional is that you can receive a Medicare rebate for a psychiatrist and a psychologist, but not for a counselor, unfortunately. In terms of going to seek out a psychologist will probably have specialized in a particular field. I mean, counselors generally do as well. They might have their areas of interest, but psychs will have done something like educational developmental psychology, or they would have gone down the clinical route or something like that. So that means the learning that you've done and the sort of techniques that you use are specific to the things that you've had a bit of learning and, education around, essentially. And I would say that maybe our approach is a little bit more concrete. So for example, I do a lot of acceptance commitment therapy. learning schema therapy at the moment as well. So it's a little bit more specific going down the pathway. But again, counseling wise, it can be very similar. We still do talk therapy. We still do the psychotherapy side of things. I think with a psychologist as well, they can do assessments, whereas like counselors can't. The only difference between the core difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist is that a psychiatrist can prescribe medication, but a psychologist can't. So oftentimes your appointment with a psychiatrist, unless you've got an ongoing debilitating mental health disorder, will be kind of like a once-off. Or like, 1 or 2 session kind of thing rather than an ongoing session, which I've actually find interesting in terms of like assessment as well, because what I've noticed now is like a lot of people go to the psychiatrist for an assessment and then get sent back to the psychologist for a more thorough assessment around what's actually going on for them, because psychiatrists won't generally do the cognitive side of things, or it's like a little bit more focused on like the medical model of like mental health rather than the social or behavioral biological model of mental health, which is really interesting.
Excellent. So I guess they're all have their different benefits. I'm just saying this from the perspective of people who might be watching. Although a counsellor, you don't get your Medicare rebate, for some psychologists, and I've seen your prices are really fair, like really fairly priced, particularly because you get the Medicare rebate. So Anushka, you work with a few different psychologists and counselors. So if you are watching this and you want some support, particularly from someone who is culturally responsive, please check out Umeed Psychology. But a counsellor can often be, I don't want to say cheaper, like less money than a psychologist on a whole as well. So, if you're...
absolutely. And this is one of the things that we're thinking about for our model as well, because we're having counsellors join up Umeed next year, is that ideally what would be happening is that like your psychologist might be charging what you would, we've got recommended rates, but like they'll be charging whatever they're charging. And then maybe the counsellor will be charging what you would get after rebate. So for example, if my fees are XYZ, say, I don't know, $200, you're getting your $89 back, then, and my math is terrible, so don't count me on this, but like the counsellor would be charging whatever 200 minus $89 is. So it would essentially even up. And I think a lot of people do that.
So it's just something to bear in mind. So talk to me about the culturally responsive. So bearing in mind that the majority of my community or people watching will obviously be from overseas. Overseas professionals come to Australia. Generally, they've lost confidence in their professional skills. The migration journey has, taken it out of them a bit in terms of financial stability, feeling a bit isolated, missing their family, etc., and a whole heap of other things that's going on. So that's, how they're feeling. But it's a bit nerve-wracking, scary, makes them anxious generally to go to their GP to get a referral. To then, it makes me nervous. I dreaded it for so long, to go to the GP to fill out this form to then get the referral to the psychologist. So I guess can you talk to them about that in terms of helping them through it, help them to navigate their emotions, like how they could do it? That's probably a really difficult question to put you on the spot there. I'm sorry, I said it.
No, it is. It's definitely a nerve-wracking sort of step, because the thing is, we talk about the barriers to mental health, and I would say that if you're a migrant, there are so many more barriers to mental health, starting off with mental health literacy to begin with. But, I find it with the clients that do come through that, like, even just getting up to the point of going, okay, I want to go see someone. Yeah, going to see a GP can be a bit daunting, especially when you're going in and you're like, I don't know what to say. Yeah. And sometimes I'll have clients call up before sessions and be like, what do I say to the Anushka? And I'm like, okay, this is usually my step. Like, call up your GP, make a mental health care appointment, because sometimes they go a little bit longer than your regular session. You'll go in, they'll get you to do something that is like a one-pager. You've got to circle a bunch of like responses, and then you give that back to them. Yeah. I think it depends on the GP. Some do the DAS, some do the K10.
Okay.
It's just to get an idea of like, where you're kind of sitting at in terms of anxiety, stress, or depression. And it just, your general mood. So it's nothing too scary. And then they're just going to ask you, how are you feeling? Why do you want to go see someone? And you don't have to like, divulge your entire life story to them. That's okay. You can just be like, I am feeling anxious, or I'm feeling a bit stressed, or there are life things going on for me right now. And GPs are generally pretty good at just going, okay, cool, fill out the form, and they'll give you your mental health care plan. And now there's two options there. Either you've already got a therapist that you want to go and see, and you can give that name to your GP, or your GP will recommend people and then, write you a letter to go to someone specific, or your GP will give you a letter that will just be addressed to a general like psychologist, and then you can go off and find someone that you want to see. So I know it feels like a terrifying process to go through, but it is like, take up like half an hour of your day really, and I promise it will hopefully be an easy enough thing to be able to go and like seek out.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, especially when we're feeling as low as we are, I can say as anxious as we are, but it's definitely worth it for sure. I think it's a once-off thing, and as soon as you've done that, you're able to get the support that you need.
And once you've done that, the first time, it's not like you have to keep going back to the GP. Like sometimes people will be going to the GP and they're like, Anushka, I'll just get like the next letter, at the same time. But, as a psych, we will send out a letter, our admin teams or ourselves, we will send out the letter to the GP and be like, hey, we need to renew sessions. And then, they'll send us back the remainder.
Perfect. Yeah. So do you do online therapy as well? Because I know, because you're based in Melbourne and you do online, because I am aware that there is a shortage of psychologists in Australia right now, and a lot of psychologists have really long waiting lists.
Yeah.
So what would someone do in that situation? And do you have availability?
So all really good questions. Look, I would say that yes, we do have really long waiting lists. I do primarily telehealth. Actually, one of the things I'm looking at doing next year is coming more into face-to-face, because at the moment, unless it's assessment, there's not really a need. And I think telehealth really provides that sort of flexibility for clients, and obviously for practitioners as well, especially when like a lot of my sessions tend to be in the evenings, because that's when people are most available, or early in the morning. So it makes it really convenient for people to be able to log in, say from work, or just before they leave, or in the evening when they get back. But telehealth is great. I've got clients literally in every state in Australia, so if you're wanting to reach out, we will try and figure out the time difference and make it work totally fine. In terms of wait lists, like, look, we have availability. I think my availability now is from like February. So like I've just booked out till the mid of Feb. But we're also getting new practitioners on board next year. So we're going to have like a whole like book open. And like, in terms of assessments, we are actually open now because we have an assessment prof psych on board as well. I would say that if you're waiting for mental health support, and this is the difficult thing, because it's the urgency of seeing someone versus making sure that you're seeing the right person. So, for us at least, when people come through, we let them know that, hey, right now we've got a wait list, you're welcome to be on it, and we can let you know if like an opening opens up for you. Otherwise, this is our next available appointment. And, we will move people if we need to, like a little bit earlier, or we'll say, hey, like, if you're looking, because a lot of the time people are coming to us for cultural responsiveness. So depending on what their issue is, we will just be like, you can either go to here, and we'll give them the resources, which is usually Shapes and Sounds, Polar Practice, Unhyphen, other sort of culturally linguistically diverse sort of practices that have similar values. And, if they run out of like, usually they'll have an availability. If they don't have availability, then we also send them a list of other resources that, like, if they're really hell-bent on being like, no, we want to see these particular people, then here are some resources that can like just to manage things for the meanwhile while you're around. But it's a really difficult space for a lot of people at the moment, because the waiting lists are so long, and whether if it is for counselling or assessment, it's hard to be able to find the right person. If you're waiting, again, I think another thing that I've seen is a lot of people will be like, oh, I'm waiting for a psychologist rather than going to the counselor.
Yes.
Again, the factor is money, but like if you're going to be if you're going to be paying like $250 for like a psychologist versus going to the counselor who will be charging you maybe 150. It's basically the same thing. Like I would say that the counselor knows what they're probably doing, and like, you know, they've got their speciality as well, and they'll be able to support you just as well. So not to hesitate, you know, based on that. But yeah, I know how difficult it can be if you're trying to see someone specific.
Absolutely. I'm happy to share my experience. I'm currently speaking to a counsellor because I'm waiting for a specific type of therapy. And that has been a long wait. But I was seeing a counsellor until that wait. And yeah, it's definitely better to take action, even if it's not the perfect person, than it is to wait that little bit longer, for sure. My daughter's back. I warned Anushka before we started. So Freya's here. She's 3, so she might come in and scream. So just a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up. So, and you're welcome, Prasad. I'm really happy that it's helpful for you. Prasad just said thank you for the really good information. Culturally responsive. So I know it's happened to many people. People have told me that it's happened where they go to a psychologist or a mental health professional, let's just say, not psychologist, a mental health professional, but they didn't feel understood. They didn't feel like the psychologist fully understood them, which obviously is their culture, because it's, you know, it's so deep within them and their opinions, their needs, because of the lack of cultural awareness. If that happened to someone, if they're not happy with the work they're doing with their professional, what should they do and what should they say?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think, look, your therapeutic environment should be one that you can be open and honest in. So if you feel like your practitioner isn't particularly being culturally responsive, and I think what we mean by that is that they're not showing cultural awareness or sensitivity, or they're not showing respect for diversity or cultural humility, or you know, trying to understand your perspective, or you feel like, oh, okay, cultural competence might not really be their strong suit. I don't think there's any harm in letting your therapist do that. You know, I think it's okay for you to go, hey, look, I really appreciate our sessions, and truly, like, your strategies have been helpful, and it helps to talk to you, but I'm just finding it really difficult that I have to explain so much of my cultural background and my values and my beliefs and experiences before we can actually move on and get to, you know, what the actual problem is. And I'm not quite feeling heard, and I'm not feeling quite understood. And now, you know, your practitioner will do one of two things. Either they will, you know, come back to you and be like, let's talk about this, you know, or they might, you know, go back and do some like learning and come back and like support you through it, or they might refer you on to seeing somebody who is culturally responsive. And like that, I think, is really important, because if you're not letting your practitioners know, and I know a lot of therapists, a lot of mental health practitioners, and I think until I bring up certain things, even with them sometimes, and I'm talking like blah, 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 this is what I do for like work, and this is what our organization does, they're like, oh, I never looked at it that way. And so you can really see that there is a knowledge gap, because I'll tell you something right now, the universities don't really focus on cultural competency, even though it's one of like our, like, we've got 8 competencies we've got to fulfill as therapists, psychologists at least, and like number 7 is cultural competency. It's usually like a 1 hour or 2 hour thing, and it doesn't dive at all into the things that are important around being culturally responsive in practice. So I think it's actually okay for you to point that out. You know, and same thing, if you are starting to feel uncomfortable, you're like, I'm not feeling heard, safe, understood, and you don't want to have the conversation, that's all right too. You know, maybe taking a step back, trying to find a culturally responsive practitioner, and like even still, you know, in an email, letting that practitioner know that that's how you were feeling is still important.
Perfect. That's great. So, yeah, and one last question for those people out there who are psychologists from their home country. So I've worked with quite a lot of psychologists, and I've helped them with their APRA resume in particular. And I see how complicated it is for an overseas psychologist or mental health professional to become registered to work in Australia, which is very frustrating, because Australia needs experienced and educated and great mental health professionals.
Oh, yeah.
So can you just give some advice to anyone in that situation who is in the middle of their APRA registration, trying to get the work experience they need in Australia.
Yeah.
You know, just some general advice, like, you know, how do
I
you?
would say, look, reach out to like if you've got LinkedIn, reach out to psychologists. If you want, you can reach out to me. Like I'm happy to like walk you through the process as well. And I understand that it is really difficult. So in terms of trying to find the appropriate work experience as well, I mean, it is a little bit difficult and like, you know, trying to find something that, yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of like, you know, depending on like what stage you're at as well, you might have to have gone back to do the additional study and then do your internship and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Trying to find people that align with your values and just sort of maybe reaching out to other people who are already in the field, having conversations with them, walking them through going through the process that they might have gone through. It's probably a good idea. There is a lot of like, you know, big mental health organizations out there. There's a lot of smaller ones as well, like us. And there's actually no harm in reaching out and just being like, hey, you know, I'm looking for experience in XYZ and this is my situation right now. Are you able to support me or know anyone that can, you know? I think that might be really helpful. And even in terms of APRA, like, well, yeah, it's a complicated space to say the least. But I think talking to people who are already in the field and have been through the process might be the best way to go about it.
I think the fact that you just even said that with so much humility, like it's complicated, will give people a bit of a phew. It's not just me.
Oh yeah.
I
can tell you, like, as somebody who has currently submitted APRA papers for, I did the Registers program for Educational Developmental Psychology. So that's for anybody who is studying psych, you'll know that once you finish up, you don't just get to automatically get the title of the master's you did. You actually have to do 2 whole years of like training before you can apply for that particular type of psychologist that you are. And I submitted my papers and like finally, you know, doing my ADHD like a month ago. And then they emailed me back and they're like, oh, but we need this thing and this thing. And I emailed them back and they haven't responded yet. But then I've also asked them questions about particular things and they've given me a lot of roundabout answers. So like, you know, not to like diss APRA or anything, I understand they're under the pump and they will give you the best information that they can. But if you're feeling like the situation, like, you know, the whole process is complicated, you're not alone. Like it is. There is not one person that I know who has gone through the paperwork, things like, you know, all of the stuff, even people who are in the field right now, like me, that like want to go through. And that's not just APRA, that is things like PRODA and getting your Medicare provider number. None of it is easy. And we need some step-by-step instructions somewhere around this stuff, right?
Definitely. APRA, listen. Yeah, cool. So it's not just them.
Yeah.
And so one final question, and it's about you. So you have your safe spaces. Can you tell us just a bit about that in case, you know, anyone's listening? And are they only in Melbourne?
At the moment, they're only in Melbourne, but we are having, are we having a meeting soon? We're having a meeting in December because we've got some people who are wanting to start one up in Perth and potentially Sydney as well. So that's the goal. The goal is to start up safe spaces in every state, if we can get facilitators on board. And if you're like, look, facilitators, you don't have to be mental health professionals. You can literally just be somebody from the community who wants to start up a space and that's how a lot of our spaces have started up, right? So in Melbourne, we've got the South Asian Women's Group at the moment. We've got the LGBTQIA group. We've got the Urja Project, which is for multicultural women who have been affected by family violence, and that's down in the Whittlesea area. We are starting up a men's circle next year, I think, and you know, alongside, so those groups, they meet monthly. It's just like a really fun, chill sort of hangout kind of connection type thing. With some of those groups, we do like sort of fun activities. So we had like a dance class for, I think, the Urja Project like a couple of months ago, which was really fun as well. And then, you know, on top of that, like one of our goals for next year is that we would like to do, fingers crossed, bi-monthly cooking for connection. So that's something that our young people ran this year. Yeah, that was so much fun. Basically, it was us getting together and made like rice paper rolls. There were like 30 people. And then we kind of spoke a little bit about mindfulness, all that sort of stuff. But it was just a chance for people to make friends and meet each other. And we're looking at doing more Dance for Dopamine, which is literally we get a dance instructor in and we like, you know, they'll teach a whole dance class, but we'll give a bit of a spiel at the end around how dance can really support mental health. Yeah.
So yeah, there's heaps going on. And just to kind of explain safe spaces, because I think we assumed that people would know what it was. So it's a specific group of people. So for example, Well, you've got migrant women, you've got South Asian.
Yeah, South Asians. For example, it'll be like so the way that the safe spaces start up is like usually someone in the community will be like, oh, it'd be really great if we had a space for just South Asian women who were like, you know, millennials and zillennials, and we can just get together and have a tea and like have chats. And we'll be like, okay, we can create that, you know?
Yeah, with things in common. And then just once a month you meet up, have fun, and just, you know, connect and feel safe and heard and understood.
And so if wants to do something bigger and like, you know, do a different event. So for example, the South Asian LGBTQIA queer group, they were like, oh, we want to host like a ball type event or something that's kind of like, something that's kind of like a little bit big and fun and exciting, because we don't have a space like that occurs. And so we're looking at hosting one of those next year. So really, if you have an idea and you're like, I want to make this happen, we will support you in making it happen.
Yeah, if you're someone out there who feels alone or a bit isolated, and you want to be connected with people from, who ADHD in Sydney, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh my God, we can do with a neurodiversity group.
Yeah, I did think about mentioning that, but we'll see. Just reach out to Anushka. She's very open to ideas, as you can see. So, so that's all from me. So just a quick summary. APRA is a nightmare. You're not alone. Keep going. Reach out to mental health professionals on LinkedIn. Contact the bigger organizations or the smaller organizations. Anushka is always open to connect as well. She's super busy. So if it's like lots and lots of questions, be patient with her. And then in terms of the mental health system in Australia, it can be overwhelming, but it is worth it. First step would be to see your GP and get a mental health care plan. And then after that, you can choose the mental health professional that you want to see between the counsellor, the psychologist, or the psychiatrist. But, bearing in mind the reason that you want to see someone. And Anushka has, wonderful culturally responsive services with psychologists and counsellors, including online. People who understand your background a bit more than other psychologists would in Australia. So I really genuinely highly recommend checking out Umeed Psychology's website. Not just saying this as like a selling point or anything, but yes, sincerely. That's it. Do you have anything else to say?
No, just that if you're interested in coming along to our safe space events, that would be fantastic. Also, just a heads up, we will be starting up low-cost counselling next year. So if you're looking for mental health support and you're not sure, about the price and the costing, you can't afford it, that's fine. Keep an eye out on our Instagram page or our website, and sign up to our newsletter, because we will be pushing out information around that in January. So we're looking at low cost as in $30, and you can probably claim that back through Medicare. So free at the end of the day. And we do free counselling for international students. So if you're an international student, reach out to us as well. We have a form for that. And if you are a young person, or any person really, if you're studying psychology and you are interested in doing placement, we also do placement.
Would that be eligible for overseas professionals as well, or would they have to?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Wonderful.
Yeah. Clinical, non-clinical placement, whichever type. If you just need a little bit of experience, we're around.
Beautiful. I think, perfect. So I share quite a lot of Anushka's things as well. So, but just check her on Instagram, and I think you've got a mailing list as well that people can get. Yeah, cool. So you can get updates as well. But thank you for coming. If you've got any questions later, just let us know. The replay will be available with subtitles soon as well. Okay. So
thanks for having me.
No worries. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.